I'm Sylvia Leiner Shordike of NeuroHorizons. I want to talk to you a little bit about baby devices and how some popular devices for infants may not always support the child's native learning process and optimal developmental trajectory. To better understand all this, let's first take a very speedy tour of the developmental progression of a neurotypical infant over their first year or more of life. From exploring on their back to rolling to creeping to crawling, to sitting, to squatting, to standing, and to walking. We call this natural progression neural mapping, meaning the brain, nervous system, and body are all talking to each other and organizing themselves for optimal action. So as a child starts to learn to move on their back, first with the primitive rolling, with the flexion, until they learn to start to use the extensors to roll onto their belly, and from there, by accident, come to sit, or sometimes, of course, they learn first from the belly to come to push themselves up over the heel and come to side sit like that. Or they come from the rolling, wanting to roll, and then see something, and then they flex on that side and come to sit. And then from here, eventually, when they start to play more in the sitting position, and they transition from side to side, then very soon they're on one foot, and they sit on the other heel, and they sit on the other foot, and then eventually they have both feet there, and that's the squat. And then they sense that they can lift their pelvis and come to stand. This neural mapping takes time, at least many months, and typically a year or more for independent standing and walking, depending on the child. And for neurotypical infants, this mapping and development largely take place on the floor. You see, every minute you allow your infant to be on the floor, freely exploring seemingly random movements, your baby is feeling and experiencing itself in relation to its environment and to gravity. Your baby is fully engaged in neural mapping, meaning it is naturally organizing and integrating its brain and nervous system and body for optimal movement and action. In other words, through movement, weight shifting, and transitioning from one position to another, your baby is learning exactly what and when it needs in order to arrive at each next step of its developmental journey. It is not about how fast an infant comes to the next milestone. It's about how a child comes to the next milestone. Maybe you can now begin to see the problem with some of these baby devices. I invite you to think about what actually is happening to this natural developmental process and neural mapping when baby devices get involved. What is the infant learning when it gets put into chairs or swings that constrain the child in the sitting position before they know how to come into and out of sitting by themselves? or gets put into one of those standers that force them into an upright position before they know how to come to stand independently by themselves, or gets put into bouncers before the child's brain and nervous system have any ability to organize jumping, or simply gets strapped into a fixed position for maybe hours at a time. And then we have those clicked car seats. Baby gets clicked into the car and then clicked out of the car and clicked into the stroller. The parent doesn't have to take the baby out of the seat. And then the parent can go shopping with the stroller with the baby still in the same seat. After the shopping, baby gets clicked out again, clicked into the car again, and then driven to the next stop. Always in the same seat and position, and then repeat. The baby may not be able to move very much at all for a very long time, far too long. And notice the parents are not participating in any transitioning, neither holding or carrying the infant, or really physically interacting much at all. Now, all these devices may at first seem very convenient and practical, both for the parent and for the infant to be more upright, such that baby can look around and see mommy more eye to eye. However, at this early stage of life, the infant's brain and nervous system have not yet learned to organize the movements and functions of sitting, standing, jumping, or bouncing. The infant has not yet worked through the sequential, layered, progressive movements required for those developmental milestones. There has been no neural mapping of those skills. If the child is too much in a device, they don't feel these weight shifts and they don't feel the transitioning. It gives them not the message how they use gravity, their weight in space to achieve, accomplish movement, to execute their intention. Instead, for example, they learn that they're standing in a device that they're held in, but they haven't learned to use their legs for standing. They haven't learned to organize their head and pelvis throughout their spine for standing. They're held by the device in the standing position. In other words, these devices may be fun, but there is no neural mapping happening that is useful for the child. It's the contrary. By putting the child into unnatural, fixed positions, their nervous system will be getting the wrong signals and will be confused and misdirected. The child is not exploring itself on the floor, so there will not be crucial learning about the environment, about gravity, about weight shifting, or about transitioning from one position to another. These distorted messages can actually cause muscles to tighten unnecessarily and work in counterproductive ways. In short, some devices may actually delay or hinder the native learning process of a child. And there is one more thing to keep in mind about baby devices. They can train a baby to want to be in fixed positions instead of creatively exploring themselves on the floor and moving in relationship to their environment and gravity. Once a child is put intentionally upright like that, they want that. They do not want to be on the floor anymore because their eyesight is changing and now they want to be able to look around from an upright high position to see what mommy and the family and the dog are all doing. Put another way, many of these devices are training your child to be a passive spectator from an unnatural and fixed position. rather than actively mapping and developing their own brain and nervous system by freely moving and exploring on the floor. And getting back to those clickable car seats, consider this. Sometimes these infants are in this hanging head position for way too long, which can create issues such as sore and tight muscles at best, or a torticollis at worst. Am I telling you never to use any of these devices? It's not black or white. I just encourage you to be very mindful of what these devices are actually doing to the native learning process of the child. In the meantime, I do hope you will give your infant all the time they need on the floor with you, freely exploring and integrating and mapping their young brain and nervous system. This floor time is so important because this seemingly random movement is how the neurotypical infant learns. Optimal neural mapping and development will be happening in just the right way for that unique child. And if you have any concerns that your child may be facing developmental delays or challenges, there are neuroplasticity-based movement educators around the world who may be able to help. I hope this has been useful information for you, and thank you for listening.